You're listening to Barbell Logic,
the podcast where we talk about what it means to experience strength
and how you can use simple, hard, and effective strategies in training and nutrition to improve your life.
It starts with meeting you where you are right now and finding lasting solutions.
Welcome to the show.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Barbell Logic. Welcome to Beast Over Burden. This is episode number 571. That's amazing, which means if someone wanted to binge this, it would take them almost 2 years to get through, which is pretty rad if they listen to one episode a day.
That's
a lot of listening to us.
Incredibly consistent.
It is consistent. There's like a lot of power in consistency as far as I understand.
How so?
Well, to get right into it, consistency is perhaps one of the most crucial behaviors. And we'll talk about exactly what those behaviors are. Maybe it's one of the most crucial pillars to creating change and to progress in many ways. We've been talking a lot about financial planning. That's a requirement. There are many behaviors that need to be consistent to achieve financial goals. Same thing for like this podcast, for getting reach, for getting brand awareness. Like you have to do a lot of talking to an empty room for a long time before you really start to get in front of a lot of people. We've heard that a lot from like another affiliate of ours, Thomas Frank, huge YouTube. And it took him a long time of like putting out content consistently without getting like the feedback of growth for quite a while. And then you get the hockey stick. So yeah, content. And then in business practices, like we've been doing at Barbell Logic, like a lot of reps every day. You work on your sales leads. We do, sales efforts, make little investments into client experience for it to pay off over time. But it has to be consistent, which means it has to be done regularly. So we're going to talk about, this is a lifting podcast. So we're going to talk about what it means to be consistent in this arena.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of examples of how the compound interest effect of doing something consistently over a long period of time yields significant growth or progress. I've seen the chart from James Clear has the 3% improvement or 1% improvement every single day for the course of a year yields a huge hockey stick amount of growth by the end of a year. And talking about the power of habits and the compound effect of consistently doing a different habit or a new thing a little bit better every single day will pay off huge in the long run, which is hard to see.
It is.
Because 1% on day one or day two does not look like much change or much progress. So you have to overcome that initial inertia of effort that's required to push through until you actually see the results of your work.
Yeah. And you can be so motivated by what that new you is going to look like, what they're going to feel like, what they're going to be able to do. But you don't get to experience that for 6 months, years, a long time. And so we've said this before, but it has to be, discipline that drives the behaviors because motivation can be fleeting. And it's the discipline that really will drive these consistent behaviors. But yeah, it is exponential. And I think for lifting, we've been lifting for a long time now, but it's not like, I don't know if it says compounding for a while until you're like in your like 50s, 60s, 70s. And it seems like that's really where all of your work you start to see the huge benefit of it, where it's there, I think, in 30s and 40s and early 50s, but depending on hormones, I don't think you get to appreciate as much until the rest of your age group is like actively deteriorating in front of your eyes. And you're just like, well, I'm going to go do some bicep curls. I think that's where you really like see the difference and feel it for yourself. Yeah.
What does consistency mean to you?
For the purpose of this discussion, I'm going to say that this is someone who's consistent in building and maintaining muscle.
Well, to me, consistency speaks more to the actions, not necessarily the outcome.
Well, okay. Yeah. The behaviors that I'm going to speak to are ones that support someone who wants to walk down that path. Or how would you clarify it if necessary?
Well, I prefer to remove outcome from the equation because that can often undermine the ability to maintain a healthy perspective on what it is that you're doing. And I think there can be something that you're aiming at along those lines, but nobody can consistently build muscle forever. And in fact, we reach a certain point in time where we're going to be losing muscle mass over the majority of our lives, or,
Right.
at least half of our lives. Over 40, we start to lose muscle mass, or at least it's an active battle against losing muscle mass.
Right. Yeah, that's why I said building and maintaining.
Yeah.
Because that's going to be, yeah. So okay, if we take outcome out of the equation, are we just starting by defining what consistency is?
Yeah. What does consistency mean to you? To me, is more about what does that look like from a behavior standpoint, less about the outcome.
So the behaviors that demonstrate consistency to me they're like the physical behaviors of the training. And I'd like to get into that a little bit more too. And then the supportive nutrition. And there's a behavior around like consistency and planning, looking ahead and, being ready to plan to get done what you want to get done, but then also kind of plan to evolve. Like what you were just saying, where the outcome, if you're like really anchored in one outcome, that might need to shift a little bit. But if you're able to be adaptable, then I think you can be consistent in your ability to kind of take all of your circumstances into account. So a few different things there. So I would say consistency in training. And I am going to speak to an outcome here because I think I actually want to convey a tactical nugget here that someone will be able to say, yes, I am this, or no, I am not that. But for this point, someone needs to train 2 to 4 times a week for most of the year. And we can go even deeper to talk about how they're training. But I think 2 to 4 times a week per year for years and years equals someone who is very invested in the health of their muscle. That is one piece of the equation for sure. And I say 2 to 4 times a week because there might be times when traveling is in the picture for someone who is, has a different recovery system, someone who's older. 2 times a week is exactly what you might need. It's exactly what you can recover from. 4 times a week might be for someone who can recover better, who wants to train that much, and we spread out the stress, but it's a manageable number of sessions per week that you can recover from, like we've talked about a lot. And there are going to be times when you're sick and traveling and you take a week off here and there, but overall, 2 to 4 times a week for years is a consistent behavior. That's what I think for the frequency aspect of it. And then what you're doing in the gym will matter. 2 to 4 times a week of going in and stretching is different than 2 to 4 times a week of going and doing hard but doable sets. So I think there has to be some consistent approach to what you're doing in the gym as well.
What does inconsistency look like?
Inconsistency to me, and this is where you start to see that behavior that I was talking about a minute ago of not being able to plan. Inconsistency looks like a sporadic 2 times a week for like 3 weeks, and then a big, 4 times a week for 3 weeks, and then going dark for like a month and a half, and then coming back out of nowhere and being like, okay, I'm ready 3 times a week for 1 week, 1 time a week for 2 weeks, 4 times a week for 1 week, dark again. And so it's so like the words don't line up with the actions. Classic example of inconsistency. But it's someone who says, "Oh, I'm ready. I can do this." It's like the all or nothing. Just like they'll want to do it all, and then they totally can't live up to it, and they just miss training sessions and go dark. That's what inconsistency looks like to me for someone who's training, where it's just like you can't keep focused on one bullseye because you're not even looking at the bullseye. The bullseye's wrong, or you have 5 different bullseyes that you're trying to chase.
That's the actions aligning with words is big picture what resonates with me most about consistency, because I think your schedule might need to be all over the place. I have a pilot who sometimes trains once a week, sometimes trains 5 times a week. So I don't know that it needs to be a certain number of sessions per week, because life may dictate you're all over the place. Maybe you're on deployment. Maybe you've got a newborn. And so you're having to completely rearrange your schedule. Maybe it's 7 days a week.
Right.
I've put on a bunch of people that are lifting once a day, 7 days a week. But the thread among all of those different schedules, regardless of how many times per week they're training, is that their behavior and their actions match up with their stated priority to make choices every day that move them towards their stated goals. So they say they want to, at some point in the future, maybe sometimes it's a weight on the bar they want to lift. Maybe it's a body composition that they want to attain. Maybe it's just the lifestyle that they want to learn how to incorporate strength training or barbell lifts into their life to be able to build and maintain strength, which can look a million different ways. But the clients that I have that I would consider consistent are the ones that their identity includes physical activity, particularly with us, obviously, barbell training, and that they organize their life in a way where that fits. And it fits in a way that they can repeat over months and years. Even though 1 month it might look like 2 sessions a week, the next month it might be, maybe it's only 1 session a week, but they're prioritizing that activity in their life to be able to do it over a long period of time.
Yeah, it's like they're doing what they can, when they can, as much as they can recover from, versus someone who says they can do it and then they do not do it. There's a big difference. You have to actually do it. And I totally agree. That looks so different because, newborn, new job, big life change, moving houses. You're not going to be on a 90-minute session 4 times a week. That's not for you right then. But you do what you can, when you can, as much as you can recover from. That's what equals consistency.
Great example where I have a client who's moving across country from Vancouver, Canada to Washington, D.C.
Wow.
And this is, to me, a great example, concrete example of how he has demonstrated extreme levels of consistency, because he has been at a different gym almost every week for the last 3 weeks because he had to deconstruct his home gym. He's been at different locations with different equipment and sometimes he's had his belt available, other times his shoes aren't available, wrist wraps not always available, wrist straps not always available. You could argue at a superficial level, his training is very inconsistent. He trained 2 weeks ago, he trained twice a week. This week, he trained once a week in a gym. But he's been in constant communication with me, and we've modified his program. Sometimes it's body weight, sometimes it's machines. When he does have access to barbells, we've been able to modify that. But I would consider that behavior very consistent.
Absolutely.
And, including as much barbell training as he can, or, resistance-based training when he can. But if not, he's doing body weight stuff or machine-based stuff. And to me, that demonstrates a very high level of consistency in that he's prioritizing that activity with whatever he has. And I think that's really important to me to emphasize, because I have a fair number of clients that set a expectation for themselves that training needs to look like X. And if it doesn't look like 2 to 4 barbell sessions a week where they're adding 5 pounds every session, then they don't feel like they're being consistent, and then they just give up. And from my perspective, I say this to my clients all the time: something is better than nothing. Stop putting yourself into a binary condition where you're either adding 5 pounds to your squat, bench, press, and deadlift, or you might as well not do anything. I'd rather them touch the bar, even if it's just the empty bar, if that's all they can do, or if they can do body weight squats, or if they can do push-ups, do something. In the long run, it'll pay off.
That's how you act like someone who lifts.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. Or trains. Yeah. I even still think that counts as training.
Mm-hmm.
You are planning for it and doing what you can. So that's like programming frequency and to some extent exercise selection. What more do you think there is to say about exercise selection? And this is where I just don't know how to not have a baseline direction, maybe not an outcome, but like, how do we decide that this behavior in the gym is different than this behavior in the gym? One of them is in support of what's important to you, and one of them is not. I'm talking about like exercise selection, form. If you go into the gym and sometimes do like body weight you do like P90X for 2 months when you could be doing something with weights. That seems to be different if you want to achieve muscle maintenance or growth. And I think there's something to be said too about how you're executing the reps as well.
Absolutely. I mean, we talk about the criteria for getting stronger and using simple, hard, effective exercises that are going through a long range of motion, using heavy weights, and using progressive overload to do that. That winnows down the number of exercises or the exercises that are going to be simple, hard, and effective and enable you to move over a long range of motion with heavy weight to a pretty short list pretty quickly. And that's obviously what we prioritize at Barbell Logic.
Yeah, that's what the Academy teaches too, is like how to do reps that are repeatable.
Right. We have principles that we base the exercises that we select to be able to train a lot of muscle with a short list of exercises. So it's incredibly efficient and effective.
Yeah. I think it's for people who don't have a coach and who don't have guidance on, yes, this rep is making you stronger. This rep isn't really making you stronger. You're just moving weight around. And for me, what comes up is the deadlift. Like deadlifting with your back and extension trains your muscles in a certain way. Doing a lot of deadlifts with your back not an extension trains your back, or not at all, places stress on your back in a different way. So at a certain point, that movement starts to be very different in the training effect. And so, like, I had spent so many years doing deadlifts with a less than flat back. And I think there comes a point where that is a no longer useful training effect because the muscles that you're intending to make stronger are getting left out entirely of the rep. And so someone who's just focused on moving the bar from A to B may be missing out on a consistent training effect. And I think that can be carried over in a lot of different movements, like a squat coming to depth, bench press touching your chest or not being locked out, not even doing the press, chin-ups, not getting full reps. See that like all the time at the gym. Curls and accessories using momentum. You want to make sure, or the target and the consistency for your form is that if you were going to say you've got stronger squatting 315, that 315 needs to look pretty similar to how you looked when you first established what the right form was for you. If it's a 4-inch high squat, I don't believe it. Sure, you've gotten stronger, but it's tough to, I think, really make that a consistent feedback mechanism or training stimulus.
The difference between having a model and principles for defining the exercise that you do versus what I would refer to as barbell nihilism, where nothing matters and you just do whatever you want, versus having a reason for doing the movements in a certain way. And to me, it always comes back to what is the intention of the exercise. I think there are a lot of different ways that you can perform exercises, and you could even debate about full depth versus partial depth and whether sometimes there's reasons to do one or the other for the purpose of getting generally stronger and using the squat as an exercise to get stronger and build muscle mass. It makes sense to have a full depth below parallel squat so that you get greater range of motion, and to define some sort of a consistent standard like the crease of your hip being below the bottom of your knee, as reaching full depth so that you can make an educated and reasonable decision about what to do with your programming, whether somebody can handle more weight or whether they've actually gotten stronger. That's the heuristic that you're using as a baseline to be able to evaluate the lift. I think that's the reason to have a standard and a model for coaching a movement pattern, along with the fact that the body adapts to what you do. And if you are not consistent in the way that you execute a movement, then the muscle and the connective tissue is not going to adapt as predictably.
Yeah.
And I think my mental model where injuries come from are either a combination of overuse from doing more volume or intensity than the tissue is adapted to, or a wildly inconsistent movement pattern that exposes tissue that it hasn't yet had a chance to adapt to. So this is where I don't think knee slide, as a concrete example, is inherently going to cause an injury. But the problem with knee slide is that it's hard to maintain consistent movement. And so you might have a client who incrementally adds weight and their knees, their patellar tendon gets used to or adapts to the load in a certain movement pattern. But if the knee slide starts creeping in at 330 or 400 pounds and the knee tendon has not adapted to being that far forward, now all of a sudden you're hitting that joint with an intensity, a load that it has not experienced up to that point. Let's say the knee slide didn't start happening until 375, 385. Now all of a sudden,
boom, surprise. That's a lot.
The joint in that end range of motion with an intensity or a stress that they haven't adapted to. And then they keep pushing the intensity up, they force through it. And then next thing you know, your tendon's all irritated. And
such a good point.
On the other side, and you see this all the time, elite level lifters who have huge knee slide all the time, but they're fine. But it's because they have trained, like that's how they squat. Every single time they hammer their knees all the way forward, bounce into the bottom, but they've incrementally and progressively overloaded up into that point. So they've been consistent with that movement pattern. This is where I think you have to be careful about defining your model or your movement standard as a capital T truth versus a pattern that you're using as a repetitive standard to be able to evaluate whether more load can be handled or whether the lifter should go up. I think there's also a skill benefit to that consistency as well, because a bunch of knee slide in the bottom is going to add a huge variable in how all of this mass is moving.
Totally. Totally changes your back angle.
So you've got 400 or 500 pounds plus body weight. Let's say it's a 200-pound lifter. Now you've potentially got 600-700 pounds that is a combined center of mass sliding around versus somebody who's able to maintain that combined center of mass balanced over the midfoot is probably going to have a more efficient lift. So that's where I think that's my kind of nuanced perspective on why I think technique or consistency or having a standard matters in a practical way to the person without being stuck thinking that, the exercise must be this way. It doesn't actually. And there's a lot of people that don't lift precisely to a particular model and they're fine. And they're some of the best lifters in the world, but they have been able to train themselves to be consistent around that pattern.
Yeah. And it can really, discrepancy or inconsistency in your form can really throw off the impact of minimum effective dose programming changes, because you don't really want your form to be part of the minimum effective dose change.
Exactly. That's true. That's very true. It's a variable that's hard to control if you're inconsistent in your movement, for sure.
Yeah.
I've been coaching that a lot, or having a lot of conversations with my clients on accessories.
Oh yeah, I was hoping you would talk about this.
I tend to find that you don't get penalized in the same way with an accessory as you do with a squat. So if your balance is all over the place on the squat, you're going to just straight up miss a rep. you're going to misgroove it, as they say. But if you slang your curls around, you're going to get the rep. You're actually going to get more reps from throwing stuff around.
Yeah.
And I've had to really coach people more and more on maintaining control and smooth range of motion and making it harder, really, and really trying to maximize the moment arm in many cases where, we talk a lot about how to make your squat and your deadlift and your bench and your press. We're trying to minimize moment arms a lot. Well, if I'm doing barbell curls, the whole point of the barbell curl is to stress the bicep. So I actually want to maximize the moment arm on the bicep curl so that I'm stressing the muscle to grow, because again, going back to the why of the exercise, it's not to lift more weight. Yes, adding more weight is a way of driving progress, but you need to be actually training the muscle and not just, throwing your hips around to swing it up to the top.
And you see that in bodybuilders, like they are working to access one muscle in their movement. And if they do the movement in a way that just allows them to complete the range of motion, they might be missing it entirely. So they're like super thoughtful. They'll use, tempo movements, pauses to make sure like they are getting the maximal, tension that they can and getting to the muscle that needs to be trained. Yeah, I totally have really appreciated that you make your clients upload their accessory videos, you watch them, hold them accountable. I think that goes a long way.
Yeah, I need to see the movement quality, and then I want to see the last 2-3 reps.
Yep.
To tell whether they're getting to the hard but doable stage.
Yes. For sure.
Are they just going through the motions, or is it actually heavy? That tells me whether we need to add more weight, or do we need to add another rep?
Or just do it again next week,
Or repeat the same thing with better movement quality.
Because if the form looks different, it's actually a different training.
Yeah, that's a great example. Especially, again, I keep going back to the curls because so many people ask for them, but then they don't actually do them in a way that is useful. So I want to make sure they're not wasting their time.
Yeah.
And then I also want to make sure that I'm not programming more than they can handle on the next session. And then whatever that momentum is just gets worse. So they just get better at
slinging weights around,
slanging the weight rather than actually using their bicep. And you feel a difference too. I mean, as a lifter, the pump is totally different. When you actually do your accessories legitimately, they become really difficult.
Yeah. I've been doing a lot of pause and tempo accessories, and you really get into some places there. It is different because you could definitely get a full ass range of motion.
Yeah.
When you're doing stuff like that.
Yeah.
Especially like one that comes to mind recently is like a chest supported T-bar row with a pause at the top for 12 reps. You can't go too heavy on that, or else rep number 1 and rep number 12 look so different that it's not the same anymore. So it means rep number 1 isn't going to feel too bad, but the ones after that, they feel pretty different because you have to get into that full squeeze and hold a pause. It's kind of fun.
Yeah, I think pause and tempo are definitely a great way to mitigate the systemic stress and also focus on the movement quality.
Yeah, big time. Awesome. Well, thanks for consistently dropping knowledge bombs, Andrew Jackson. Appreciate it.
You as well.
Yeah. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll be here with you again next Tuesday. And until then, be consistent with your reps, be consistent with your training in a way that works for you based on what you can do when you can do it. And we will see you next time.
Bye-bye.